it is. And, lately I've been pushing what I call adult use instead of recreational use, because I feel that it's a fundamental human right to existence. And our medical rights should be inalienable human rights. Whereas if you're sick, there shouldn't be another human being in the way of you getting a simple plant or flower that could remedy your chemotherapy session or whatever you're dealing with. I hope more and more of us fight for just our own freedom. I mean, it's not just about, I'm sick, let me have something to smoke. It should be like, I'm of the age of consent. Let me drive cars, let me own guns, let me own liquor if I want it, or pornography. Let me be an adult. Let me make decisions for myself. And I think that is a human right.
Well, there's no surprise that this is a doctor, and he was talking about the endocannabinoid system, and he was actually calling it the endocannabinoid signaling system. And man, he was going into some good detail about it, and talked about the fight or flight part of the brain where we live in fear.
I wrote this article recently about the amygdala, and it's important for people to understand what the amygdala is and how it relates to cannabis. And if you're interested, I could I don't want to dominate the conversation today, but I can give you maybe a 10-minute recitation on how all cannabis use is medical, even if you don't understand the science, because what it does, it allows you to turn off your amygdala. Now, basically you have two parts of your brain, the upper part and the lower part. The upper part is the cerebrium, it's the cognitive part of the brain, and the lower part, the brainstem, is the thing that preserves the safety for the animal. So it's involved in fight, flight, or freeze, and that's all the brainstem does: fight, flight, or freeze. But the midbrain switches between the upper brain and the lower brain. Okay. So the midbrain, part of the midbrain is called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the fear organ of the brain. And what it does is it monitors the current situation. And if it matches anything that's going on currently with what happened in the past that was dangerous, if it makes it match with danger, then it puts you on high alert. And it basically does what's called amygdala hijack. And amygdala hijack is when the midbrain switches off your cognitive part of the brain and switches on your brainstem. So if we're having a conversation and you hear a gunshot, you're going to turn away from this conversation and pay attention to something that might be dangerous. And you're going to go into brainstem mode. And when you go into brainstem mode, you don't have the upper motor functions of love and empathy and compassion. And so there's really two types of people. There's people that can turn off your amygdala and reside in your cognitive sphere, and there's people that can't. And although that they can go into their cognitive sphere, when they're in amygdala hijack, they stay out of their cognitive sphere and they go into their protection mode. And so what happens is this protection mode prevents you from thinking, and it makes all other information that comes into you, since you know this is a dangerous situation, you don't have to think anymore about any other useless information. So for instance, if you're out in the woods and a bear attacks you, you don't have to think about the color of the bear's eyes. You know this is dangerous. You've seen this before, and you just get out of the way. Okay? So if anybody gives you any extraneous information, so if you say marijuana to a cop, it puts them into amygdala mode. They already know it's dangerous. They don't need any other information. And if you try to tell them, pot's not bad, they reject that information and view it as an irritants. And this kind of explains the drug war. And marijuana works by inhibiting stuff. So by feedback inhibition from the nerves, when you have a seizure or a spastic condition, the proximal nerve is giving a lot of information to the distal nerve. You're seizing, you're spasming, and the distal nerve has a way to protect itself. And so what it does is it creates the cannabinoids. They go in a retrograde direction. They go forward, they go backwards, and they inhibit this transmission of nerve transmission. So when you use cannabis, what happens is the first time, everybody has cannabinoid receptors, but the first time you use cannabis, something miraculous happens. We don't really know what it is, but all of a sudden you have a bunch of cannabinoid receptors that are functioning that you didn't have before, and they call it upregulation of the cannabinoid receptors. So if you don't smoke, you got some cannabinoid receptors, but once you smoke, all of a sudden you upregulate a zillion more receptors, and all of a sudden you have the ability to inhibit parts of your brain that you couldn't inhibit before. You have neuroplasticity. Now, a third part of this theory that I have, cannabinoid receptor function. Are you guys all following me with this?
Absolutely, man. We're gobbling this up. It is killer.
100%.
Okay, so what happened is they know right where on the DNA where the cannabinoid CB1 receptor resides, the coding for it. And they can take that section of the DNA out and put some gibberish DNA in there. And when they raise mice with this DNA, they can do tests on them, and indeed they do not have cannabinoid receptors, and they're perfect mice. Other than that, they just don't have cannabinoid receptors. So they wanted to find out what the difference was. What does a cannabinoid receptor do for memory? So they did this test called a Morris water maze. And Morris water maze is a big tank. It's about 6 foot in diameter. It's full of water. And they placed a TV camera over the